Hello. As I've mentioned before, I became a Doctor Who fan in the autumn of 1984. My PBS station was running through the Peter Davison stories for the first time in chronological order. I would have first tuned in for a little bit of Time Flight, and then over the next couple of weeks, 25 minutes airing every weeknight, I dipped in and out of stories such as Arc of Infinity, Mawdryn Undead. I missed all of Terminus, and then I tuned in one evening to watch part one of what turned out to be Enlightenment. Now, I had been indifferent to Time Flight, I had been intrigued by Arc of Infinity, and I had really enjoyed the mythology of the last two episodes of Mawdryn Undead, and I can't remember why I didn't watch any of Terminus at all, but watching part one of Enlightenment was my cross the Rubicon moment. Once I got to the cliffhanger, which knocked me clear across the room, there was no turning back. To this day, 39 years later, I have never voluntarily missed another episode of Doctor Who ever again.
Electronics. An Edwardian racing yacht.
Look at the screen. We're not on a yacht, we're on a ship. A spaceship.
I heard the Guardian say to me, "Kill the Dr. Turlough." But he was a bird on his head all day. Kill the Dr. Turlough. Kill the Dr. Turlough. Oh, kill the Dr. Turlough. For the voyage is long and the winds don't blow, and it's time to kill the Doctor. Well, we landed on a ship in space. Kill the Dr. Turlough. And it seems we're in some kind of race. Oh, kill the Dr. Turlough. Kill the Dr. Turlough. Oh, kill the Dr. Turlough. For eternity's a very long time, and it's time to kill the Doctor. Well, I don't know what that crystal buys. Save the Dr. Turlough. But I don't believe the Guardian's lies. Oh, save the Dr. Turlough. Save the Dr. Turlough. Oh, save the Dr. Turlough. The Guardian's bad, but the Doctor's wise, and it's time to save the Doctor. Oh, save the Dr. Turlough.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. I am out of town for most of the month of August, and this is a pre-recorded episode. I'll be brief in my introductions. I am very, very happy to say that we are at the novelization of one of my favorite Doctor Who stories of all time. I am working on a top 60 list for the 60th anniversary to be unveiled during a panel at LI Who later this month. Enlightenment is certainly going to be on that top 60 list covering Doctor Who's first 60 years. It's also the last of 10 straight Peter Davison novelizations before the Target line changes its focus considerably, which I will tease at the very end of the episode. Enlightenment was the first Doctor Who story with a female scriptwriter, Barbara Clegg. Joining us this week is my daughter, Callie, a teenager. Enlightenment has been her first complete classic Doctor Who serial, and Enlightenment has been her first complete Doctor Who novelization. She has some thoughts, and I cannot wait for her to share them with you. This conversation was recorded not over Zoom, not over Zencaster, not at a convention, but face-to-face right here at our dining room table. I'm sitting in exactly the same seat where I'm recording this part of the episode. You will notice that I do at times egg her on in a lawyerly fashion, just to make sure that she gives the best and most forceful possible answer, and I think you'll enjoy the results. It's a slightly shorter conversation than I usually have with my other guests. She is not an expert on Doctor Who trivia, so we are not going to be able to play a game of 20 questions, but we do play the game, and I think you will enjoy the game that we play. Without any further ado, let's get to it.
This is Tim Trelaw.
This is David J. Howe.
I'm Peter Purvis.
I am Sadie Miller.
This is Lauren Cornelius.
Larry, it's Fraser.
For all things in the Doctor Who collecting world and beyond, the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. I'm Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I've been collecting for 42 years. You're listening to Doctor Who Literature on the Direction Point Podcast Network. Keep turning the pages.
So, Callie, welcome to my show.
Hi.
You've been around for almost every episode that I've recorded over the last 18 months, but this is your first time as my guest.
Uh-huh.
How old are you?
13.
What's your favorite book of all time?
Probably The Obsession.
Who wrote The Obsession?
Jesse Satantos.
And what's it about?
It's kind of hard to explain.
Well, we have time.
Okay. It's about this girl, and there's this guy who, who obsesses over her. But she also has a stepfather who basically, ruined her mother, who used to be a strong, independent woman. So, she hatches a plan. And one weekend, while her stepdad is working on a car, she tips the jack and crushes him with the car. And then...
Oh my goodness, the poor man!
And then, after that, at the end of the book, she decides a plan so this boy will stop obsessing over him, and spoiler alert, it ends in his death.
Well, I'll just go back and put a spoiler warning before that.
Yep.
So, what is your second favorite book of all time?
Let me think.
Well, the very first book that I ever read you was Goodnight Moon. You enjoyed that one.
I did enjoy that one.
Of course, you were hours old.
I'm honestly not sure. I only really categorized my first favorite.
Well, I read you To Kill a Mockingbird during the pandemic. You enjoyed that.
There are a fair amount of books that I enjoyed. I guess I wouldn't say it's my second favorite, though.
Well, of every book that you've ever read, going back to Goodnight Moon, and including all of our childhood favorites like Callie Cat Learns About Opposites and Fireman Small and The Little Engine That Could, where does Doctor Who Enlightenment fit on your all-time list of best books ever?
My all-time, I would say probably my top 50.
Top 50? That's pretty solid. Well, let's start off with some trivia. Doctor Who went on the air in November 1963. Its very first producer was a woman.
Oh, that's good.
A young Jewish woman in her late 20s.
Uh-huh.
Verity Lambert.
Okay.
She produced the show for the first 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the show debuts November 23rd, 1963, the day after the Kennedy assassination.
Mm-hmm.
Guess how many years it took before Doctor Who had its first female episode writer?
Well, I know it was 1983.
So how much time is that?
That takes 20 years.
20 years.
20 years.
And after 1983, when is the next time, take a guess, that Doctor Who will have an episode written solely by a female?
Solely? Because I know there are a few co-written.
There was a husband and wife team that wrote 3 or 4 episodes in the mid to late 80s. But when is the next time there's an episode only written by a woman?
I would say probably early 2000s.
There was one in 1989.
Oh, that's good.
And the next one after that was the year 2007.
Okay, so I was kind of close.
Kind of close.
Kind of.
So, let's see. I've shown you now 3 complete Doctor Who stories. Not counting stuff that you watched a few minutes of when you watched Dinosaurs on a Spaceship with me when you were 2 years old. But
so I know, I can recall 2 of them.
we watched Blink.
Yeah, I know. I watched that one a lot.
And we also watched Rosa.
Which one was that?
That was about... Wait, did you just ask me which one was Rosa?
I don't remember.
Of all the famous women in history named Rosa.
Oh, that was that was the one we watched in the hotel room. About Rosa Parks. That was the 13th Doctor.
That's correct. And that was an episode that was written by a woman.
Oh, perfect.
Although the male showrunner gave himself a co-writer credit on the episode.
Taking credit. Yeah.
So you've watched Blink, you've watched Rosa, and now we've watched Enlightenment. Of those 3, which is your favorite?
Probably Enlightenment, because I can remember the most of it, and it didn't give me nightmares.
What, Blink gave you nightmares?
Really?
You ever notice when you're walking in the apartment and I'm walking behind you and you turn around and I stand still?
No, that's mostly me doing that.
Well, I started it.
Yeah.
You just do it better.
Yeah.
Alright, so let's talk about Enlightenment on television. Tell me your opinion of Enlightenment on television. We watched all 4 episodes over 2 nights earlier this week.
I would say Enlightenment was really good. I like how Tegan was very visual that she was disgusted by Mariner. I enjoyed that, but I think that the male script editor definitely went in and changed a few things. Because there's a point in the show, I think in the second part, where Tegan refers to herself as stupid 10 times.
Doctor?
What are you doing here?
Don't ask. I was so stupid.
Well, we will find out later this year. They are releasing Enlightenment, that whole season, on Blu-ray. When they release the show on Blu-ray, they give you all the old versions of the script. We'll be able to read the rehearsal script, which is the last thing submitted by the writer.
Okay.
We'll be able to read the shooting script, the camera script, the transmission script. So we'll be able to track all the versions. We'll be able to see what Eric Sayward... Now, Eric Sayward had... If you watch all of his episodes, and I have, there's a little bit of misogyny going on there. Mm-hmm. But Barbara Clegg is the first woman to write for the show.
So we will read the rehearsal script then.
Do you know why she submitted this story?
I actually don't think so.
She had relatives visiting her home.
Okay.
And they were older, rich relatives who were very snooty.
Oh, fun.
And they kept demanding that she entertain them.
Oh.
How does that relate to the plot of Enlightenment?
Well, it relates to the plot of Enlightenment because, the Eternals are using the ephemerals, as they call them, for entertainment.
Now, who's an example of an ephemeral?
Someone like Tegan, Turlo, or any of the crew, or even the Doctor.
Anybody who is mortal.
Yeah, anybody who exists inside of time.
And the Eternals live where?
They don't live anywhere. They exist in the empty void outside of time.
And why are they having this race?
They're having this race, well, for 2 reasons, actually. The first reason is quite simple. It's just to amuse themselves. It's for fun. I mean, if you're there for eternity, what else are you going to do for fun? But the other reason is that the winning captain of this race achieves enlightenment.
What is enlightenment?
It's pretty hard to describe. I think in the book it's described as just the choice, but also just the power. It's like fulfillment, basically.
Captain Stryker gets a line of dialogue. Enlightenment is that which will allow me to know all things and the power to achieve them.
And the desire, which he then goes, I will not explain.
He will not explain that which he most desires.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting about the Eternals are they're just cosplaying as humans. Being Eternals, they wouldn't have genders, so Stryker would not really be a white male from the early 1900s. Rack would not really be a saucy pirate captain, probably from the 17th or 18th centuries.
Mm-hmm.
So what's interesting about the story is in part 1 and part 2, except for Tegan, all the characters are male.
Yes.
Because when you're talking about an Edwardian was 1901 to 1914 when Edward was the king.
Yeah.
An Edwardian racing yacht was a very male-dominated industry. You weren't going to have female captains, you weren't going to have female pilots, you weren't going to have female crew.
I will point out, however, in the pirating industry, I don't know what else to call it, the Buccaneer was a ship based on the pirates. I will say that women were very prevalent during that time period, and there were many famous women pirates.
Have you ever heard of Madame Ching?
I think.
She was a famous Chinese pirate in the 19th century.
Yes.
And she was featured in a Doctor Who episode last year, 2022. Although she had a small part in the episode and had nothing to do with the finale. So that was another script written by a woman that was script edited by a man, and most of Madame Ching's scenes probably fell by the wayside.
Oh.
However, when you get to part 3 of Enlightenment, obviously things flip and Captain Rack is introduced. But before that, if you're just watching parts 1 and 2 where the only woman is Tegan, what perspective does Barbara Clegg give to these scripts that Doctor Who had never had before because it had never before had a female writer?
She definitely gives more inside the perspective of a woman. Especially for the episode, you don't get too much insight about what's going on inside of her head, because that's better explained by the book. But it's you definitely see more, instead of being like absolutely very excited when Mariner is like trying to flirt with her. She's more disgusted by him and trying to like shoo him away.
Well, let's look at it this way. Mariner is first mate on a ship.
Yes.
He's a pretty handsome devil. He climbs on top of the TARDIS, he looks in through the scanner, he sees Tegan.
That's definitely a weird start. Just being spied on, I think it definitely really helps set the scene as to looking inside Mariner. It definitely sees like the first thing we see of him is him climbing up to the top of the TARDIS and spying on her. So it's very interesting to see, and you kind of realize that Tegan's going to be this really weird character, and he's going to do a lot of...
Well, Tegan's not the weird character.
Or Mariner, rather.
Now, in previous Doctor Who stories, which you haven't seen, Doctor Who usually has female companions, and they usually leave because they fall in love and they can get married.
Tegan, however, is not a fan of this, and it dives deeper into that in the book, but we're talking about the episode.
So in the episode, Mariner keeps saying nice things to Tegan. She fascinates him. She intrigues him.
Except...
He wants to please her.
Except...
Isn't that nice?
First off, he doesn't actually love her. Eternals aren't capable of feeling love. And second of all, if you're trying to please someone, especially a woman, you don't say, "You're fascinating to me." You're making them sound... It's almost objectifying them, making them seem like a specimen instead of an actual person. And he goes as far to be like, "No, ephemerals are worth nothing." And says that to her face. And, yeah, he's like, yes, ephemerals aren't worth anything.
So when I think it's Captain Davies' ship blows up, Tegan asks what happens to the crew. And he says they were all transported home, to outside of time. But she points out, no, that's the officers. What about the human crew? And what does he say?
Oh, it's fine. They're not worth anything.
Ephemerals have a short lifespan anyway, something along those lines.
Yeah, they don't. They were gonna die anyway. So.
And that doesn't win Tegan's heart over?
No, I don't know. Shocked me.
So what sort of things does Janet Fielding, that's the actress who plays Tegan, what does she do on television to express her pleasure with Mariner's attentions?
Sort of, a lot of just, not as much physical, but just some physical, but more sort of just saying get away from me. And sort of, her body language is very outwardly negative towards him and sort of trying to turn away from him, although in certain moments, she sort of does feed into it and sort of lets it happen.
Like, for example, does she ever give him side eye, or does she ever give him dirty looks?
Yes.
And does she do that very well?
I think not to the untrained eye, but to somebody who, like, sort of knows what's going on, it's definitely very obvious. But I think if you aren't paying too much attention, you would miss it.
Now, then we get to part 3. When did you figure out that Captain Rack was the big villain in the story, outside of the Black Guardian?
Maybe the first scene where she runs into one of the crew, Turlo, the first thing she does with him is tie him up and start talking to him about torture methods.
Also, when Turlo was first taken prisoner, she has a sword, and there's a jewel in the sword handle, and she says to her first officer, "May this have as big an impact as my present to Cretus the Greek."
Yep.
And you turned to me at that moment and you said,
Yeah.
"Oh, she's the bad guy."
Yeah, I mean, it was very apparent from the beginning that she was... I mean, they talk about the Buccaneer a lot. So, and they only really talk about the Greek ship, that ship, and Captain Davy's ship. I don't actually know which time period that one was
Yeah,
from.
we never get to meet Captain Davy.
But those are the only 3 ships mentioned, and we do see that there are more than 3 ships. There are more than 3 ships, or 4 ships competing.
We see all the officers at Captain Rack's reception in part 3.
Yes, there are quite a few of them.
Linda Barron plays Captain Rack. She was on Doctor Who 3 times, 1966, 1983, and then an episode that aired 2 weeks before you were born.
Oh, so 2010?
Yep, so Mommy and I were in a hotel room in Atlantic City, and I watched that episode, and you could have been due any minute at that point, so you were almost born in the middle of Linda Barron's last Doctor Who episode.
Oh.
And then she passed away last year.
Oh, that's sad.
She's very, very good, though.
She is.
Enlightenment is my second favorite of her performances.
Ah.
When Tegan shows up, she says to Tegan that all of her guests find her intriguing and want to meet her. So, what did you think this was? You thought this was going to be a nice girl power moment?
I wished.
What did you expect?
I sort of expected. I don't really know what I expected. I kind of expected her, Rack, to sort of tell Tegan things that the other 2 didn't know. But obviously, my dreams were crushed.
Well, part 3 cliffhanger. Rack takes Tegan into the wheelhouse and says to her, "Have you ever heard of the expression time standing still?"
And she goes, "Oh yes," and it's an expression that means she freezes Tegan, and then Rack turns to the camera and she says exactly what it says.
And then Captain Rack goes into a little jewel box and she takes out a nice, pretty red jewel and she puts it in the middle of Tegan's tiara. Isn't that a nice thing? She's prettying Tegan up.
But if I recall, there was a gem there in the first place.
And after she puts the red jewel in the tiara, she turns to the camera. What does she do?
And she gives a little speech about the Doctor not knowing everything because he thought that he could outsmart her.
And then she cackles.
Yeah.
She gives very good cackles, doesn't she?
She does.
And at that point, were you still a fan of Captain Rack?
No. And then the thing was at that point that I realized that Captain Rack wasn't a girl at all.
Exactly. She's an Eternal cosplaying as a female pirate.
Yeah, I forgot about that part. So, yes.
So, you've heard this show many times before. What 2 games do I most frequently play with my guests?
Guess the cliffhanger and 20 questions.
I don't know if 20 questions is for you because you do not have the entire Doctor Who program guide 1963 to 2022 memorized.
I know 3 episodes.
The way that your father has it memorized.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you also saw the first 5 minutes of dinosaurs on a spaceship when you were 2, and you enjoyed it.
When I was... That was over 10 years ago.
In fact, when you were 2, I used to show you all the Doctor Who opening credit sequences on YouTube as a montage.
I know. Yeah, I know.
You used to enjoy that. So you would say, "I want to watch Doctor Who."
Oh.
That was a good bedtime stall tactic. So we're going to play a game of Guess That Cliffhanger.
Except...
The problem is you've only seen 3 cliffhangers.
Yeah.
And once I give you 2, it's pretty obvious what the last one is. So we're going to play Guess That Cliffhanger with a twist.
Oh no.
This is your first cliffhanger. A man wearing a raven on his hat yells at a boy.
Guardian. The Black Guardian yelling at Turlo. Oh, that's the cliffhanger for part 2 where Turlo jumps off the ship.
All right, you're 1 for 1. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Your second cliffhanger. Mm-hmm. Captain Stryker opens the window.
Oh, that's the one. That is the cliffhanger for the first part, when the Doctor and Turlo and Tegan discover that they're actually in space and not underwater.
That was one of my first cliffhangers. I was probably about 2 or 3 weeks into being a fan of the show, and that was the moment of no return. After that, I never missed an episode voluntarily, because that was an awesome, mind-blowing...
That was a really fun cliffhanger.
In fact, the new series borrowed that cliffhanger for an episode that was made before you were born.
Yeah, I think it was probably my favorite one of the episode.
And the very last cliffhanger, the camera shows us a picture of Tegan's tiara.
Oh, it's when Rack delivers her speech about the Doctor after putting the crystal that's going to blow up their ship in Tegan's tiara.
Very good. So you're 3 for 3. Next time, I'll have hopefully shown you a lot more Doctor Who. So next time, I may force you to play 20 questions.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about other elements of Enlightenment on TV.
Okay.
The 5th Doctor is my Doctor because he was my first.
That is fair.
And also his wife has been on my show, so big fan of hers.
Oh, you should shout her out.
Oh, hello, Elizabeth. Maybe I'll have you read her book next. She just wrote a novel about women growing up in World War II, where the husband has gone off to war, and it's the mother and daughters forced to fend for themselves.
Oh, sounds fun.
You might enjoy that. That's called The Orphans from Liverpool Lane.
Ah, so it takes place in England.
Between 1940 and 1949.
Okay.
Now, what did you think of the 5th Doctor? This is the first time that you've seen him.
I think it was a good performance. I mean, I can only really compare him against the 10th, which is like kind of my favorite, and the 13th, which I've only seen one episode of.
Well, the 10th Doctor, his favorite Doctor is the 5th because he grew up watching the 5th Doctor. He's only 2 years older than me, and his father-in-law is Peter Davison, the 5th Doctor.
Oh, so they have that connection already.
They did a charity episode in 2008 called Time Crash, where it's the two of them together for 5 minutes. It's very funny. Well, I mean, kind of funny.
Peter Davison. I liked his performance. I think it was good. I think it was also pretty cool watching him work out the things very slowly, and then his eventual moment of triumph at the end.
Now, before Peter Davison, the Doctor was Tom Baker, who was the funny Doctor.
With the scarf?
That's right. And the producer, John Nathan Turner, said, I don't want a funny Doctor. We've already had that. We want a serious Doctor.
Right.
The problem is Peter Davison can't help being funny.
Yeah.
So he would do all these non-scripted things. Also, all the eye rolls, the bit where he stays behind in the captain's mess to finish his dinner before going up to the wheelhouse.
Unscripted?
All the bits where he's tossing a coin, starting to walk in one direction, and then changing his mind and going in the other. Mm-hmm. That's all him, putting his humor in the script, because it's unscripted.
Ah.
Now, what unique accessory does Peter Davison wear on his costume?
The celery stick.
That's right. And in this story, he replaces his old celery stick with a fresh celery stick from Captain Rack's ship.
That was a very fun part of the episode.
Now, if you put real celery on your lapel, it will wilt in the matter of hours. Don't ask me how I know. But it's not, Captain Rack's ship is not real. It's created, so it's not real. Yeah. It's virtual celery, so it never ages.
Also, yeah, but I don't think it would add very much to the show if there was just a wilting piece of celery on his shirt.
And it stays on his lapel until his very last episode when they explain why he has the celery. Mm. He told the writer, look, I've been on the show 3 years. I need an explanation for the celery. Put one in.
What is it?
Well, when I show you the last episode, you'll see.
Okay.
So, Janet Fielding, what do we think of her?
I liked it. I think she had a good performance. I think she was really good. I liked it. I liked her performance a lot. I like that there was an Australian character on the show. I think it makes sense considering circumstances. Very good.
Janet Fielding is one of the longest-running companions. She started with the Fourth Doctor. She was on the show for parts of 4 different seasons.
Is she still Tegan?
She came back in the most recent episode, the 60th, not the 60th, in the most recent episode aired, the BBC's Centenary Special in 2022. She came back and was an above the main credits main character.
Was she still Tegan?
She was still Tegan. She came back, and we saw how Tegan has reacted to life without the Doctor and what she's doing now in the 2020s.
Fun.
And then, in a mini-sode that was just released a few days ago, well, as we record this a few days ago, as I'm releasing this about a month ago, she played Tegan again in a trailer meant to promote the Season 20 box set, of which Enlightenment is a part. So Janet Fielding is still playing Tegan today.
That's good. I think that's good.
Now, Mark Strickson plays Turlough. Mark Strickson is more famous in the real world as the wildlife TV producer who discovered Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, who was a little before your time, but I expect you've heard of him. Mark Strickson, this is his 3rd story. It's the last story of a trilogy where Turlough has been under the sway of the evil Black Guardian and is trying to kill the Doctor, although he sticks around for parts of 2 more seasons.
We find out at the end of the episode that he's actually not from Earth.
What do we think of Turlough?
As the character, I don't know.
Well, it's the more, and I say this because of the language of television, it's the more stereotypically feminine part. He's afraid, he's cowardly, always running away, not very reliable.
I would not say so. I would actually disagree with you.
How do you mean?
Because, yes, he's a coward, yes, he's afraid, but all of this is driven by his greed.
True, his
That's
greed.
the thing. It's not driven by the stereotypical feminine, sort of like vain maternal. It's driven by his greed. Like, the whole reason he got himself in this situation was because he didn't like where he ended up, and he wanted to get away. So, he acts that way based on greed, because impulsivity and greed, because he was greedy, but also impulsive. So he's gotten himself thrown into situations because of that. So I think he would react as probably a normal person would, I would say.
At the end of the episode, he's given a choice. A diamond, a very large diamond that could buy a galaxy. Mm-hmm. But if he keeps the diamond, he has to give the Doctor to the Black Guardian, which is probably not going to end well.
No.
I can't imagine the Doctor and the Black Guardian sitting there playing Uno.
No.
So, what choice does Turlough make?
Turlough does end up making the right choice, which makes sense because I believe near episode 4, when he gets himself locked in the danger in the chamber, he does end up, after the Black Guardian abandons him, he ends up trying to reach out for the Doctor instead.
And that works.
He says he never wanted to make the deal. So I don't think he was ever actually going to kill the Doctor. He was never going to succeed, but I think it was smart how they played it out. How he sort of, you would expect him to be annoyed about handing it over, but it definitely reveals he's not that kind of person. Even though he's very greedy, even though he's driven by greed, he's not greedy, and he eventually does end up switching sides, and when he just he immediately pushes it. It's like, here, take it.
And the bright light
ends
causes the Black Guardian to burst into flames.
And then he throws the cube in.
And the actor who played the Black Guardian died 2 or 3 years later. So he came back to the show for a radio serial playing a different character, but this is the last time we ever see the Black Guardian on Doctor Who.
Is this the last time we ever see the White Guardian?
Yes. Unless they come back in a future episode, because they like to bring back returning villains.
Obviously, once the Black Guardian dies, so does the White Guardian, because they can't... There's a bit about that right before everyone reunites. There's a bit about that.
The White Guardian and the Black Guardian have a little bit of a squabble about light cannot exist without knowledge of dark and vice versa.
Yeah. So
in terms of other performances, what do you think of the Black Guardian as a villain?
I don't really love him as a villain, but I really like the concept of it. I really like the concept of like this balance, and I wish it could have kept going, but I think it was really cool to sort of I like the part where like they will never know true good and evil. I think it's really cool how the bad guy and the good guy are like one and the same thing. How there's a balance, and I like it instead of the bad guy seeing as something like that has to be defeated, seeing as something that's needed in order to bring balance.
Then when they materialize on Captain Rack's ship, they materialize as one unit and then separate into two.
Exactly. I think that's a really cool concept, and more shows should do that.
Now, the character of Mansell, who plays Captain Rack's first officer, was originally supposed to be an established actor.
But
then there was a strike, and filming was pushed back a month, and the original actor was no longer available. So they brought in a British musician named Lee John. He spells his name Lee, L-E-E-E. And he was the lead singer of a band called Imagination. And we're going to pause now, and I'm going to show you a video starring Lee John and Imagination. So we have now watched a few seconds of Body Talk by Imagination featuring Lee John. Apart from music videos, Enlightenment was his first ever acting performance, and fandom has been kind of split on his performance. What did you think of him? He was Captain Rack's first officer.
I think I feel like it's sort of conflicting because he was good. He was good, but he was in very small parts. His role was important, but it felt almost like it was written for him to, like, not talk as much as possible.
Now, he's playing Linda Barron's first officer. Is Linda Barron giving a subtle, closed, nuanced performance?
Absolutely not.
She's going over the top.
Yeah, I think that really helps add to I think it almost shows how far the Eternals are willing to go because they're so bored because they have nothing to do.
She's having the time of her life.
Yeah, because when you're an Eternal and you exist outside of time, there are no consequences ever. So she can kind of just do whatever she wants.
And Mansell, as the first officer, he has to give a performance that matches hers. You can't have an over-the-top, sassy pirate captain sashaying her hips and cackling. Right. And have a first officer who's wearing a button-down suit and glasses and going, "Yes, ma'am."
But I can see why something like that is why people would say that he was bad in his role because he wasn't able to match that performance. But I don't know how necessary that was because most of the scenes where they're together, he's just following orders. Whereas, he doesn't have to match the energy if he's not near her.
There is a line in the novelization which he does not deliver on television that I wish he had a chance to deliver.
Uh-huh.
The officer gave Turlough a shove with his boot. This is page 69. "Crawl," he said.
Oh, yes.
"Lick the captain's boots."
Yes, I think in talking terms of the TV show, his performance is kind of subpar compared to Rack's, but I don't think it needed to be as excessive. Obviously, the actress who plays Rack is an actual actress, so of course her performance is going to be better. But I would say his acting did the job.
And it's a small part. It's only 4 or 5 scenes in the back half of the story. He's not as important a character as Stryker or Mariner or Jackson.
But at the same time, he is very important. He's an important character, but it feels almost as if he was written to just not have to say much.
Which is why you can give the role to somebody who is famous to those who watch music videos, but has never acted in a movie or play or TV show before.
Exactly.
All right, so now we'll talk about the book. How long did it take you to read this novel?
Well, yesterday I read the first 2 chapters.
And today I gave it to you and I said read chapters 3 and 4.
And
you come back to me an hour later and you go.
That was not an hour, but yeah, I finished it.
So what are some differences between... Well, I'll tell you what, when these novelizations are written, they're not usually based on the video. They're usually written based on the last script that they have on file. So sometimes there are changes from the book and TV. So, for example, there might be scenes in the book that were deleted for TV. There might be scenes that were added for TV that are not in the book. For example, the Part 3 cliffhanger That was probably written by
Yes.
Eric Sayward, and it doesn't appear in the book. So that's why I wrote it in pencil myself.
Oh. So, yeah, the book came out a year later than the original script. So this is based on the original script.
Probably not the original. No, I think the original script had a different name, and it was before the Guardians. So the original ending would not have involved Turlough and the Black Guardian. The original ending probably would have involved Barbara Clegg's own characters, Mariner, Stryker. Because this was going as part of a trilogy, they had to rewrite it and change the plot. And Eric Sayward, I think, wrote the last 10 minutes himself.
Is that why Tegan is not very important in the last part of the episode?
Almost certainly, because when she submitted her first draft, all she knew about Turlough was his name, so he was a minimal presence. Eric Sayward beefed it up later because it was part of a trilogy.
Which is the one thing I will say that does make sense. But yeah, I think in the book, let me see if I can find a place, because in the book, Tegan's character is sort of, it's her dislike towards Mariner. It's like more amplified because it's based on the script. It's based on a different script. I don't know where I can find it, but I know there's a part that's referenced in the book about Tegan having many guys fall for her before, and so she was trying to use these tactics, but it wasn't working on Mariner.
There's a scene that I'll read out to you, and let me get your reaction. So we're going to do now a dramatic reading from the bottom of page 93. I will play the role of Mariner, strong male action hero, and Callie will play the role of
Tegan,
the shy wilting flower, the little damsel in distress.
Yes. You gonna start?
I've been looking for you everywhere, he said urgently. I was worried. Where did Rack take you?
Tegan found his concern slightly irritating. To the wheelhouse. She tried to sound as non-committal as possible, but Mariner was not diverted.
You're unharmed, he asked, even more fiercely.
Tegan gave him a bored look. Of course.
Mariner made the mistake of inexperience. He tried to explain himself. I was concerned for you, he muttered.
For the first time, Tegan felt that she could cope. There had been other young men boringly concerned about her in the time past. She was on home ground. Thank you. You shouldn't have been, she said dismissively.
The squelch did not work on Mariner. He ignored it and simply continued to state his own feelings, which appeared to be quite impassioned. I missed you, he said hotly. I was concerned. Or as we say in Brooklyn, concerned. He looked into her eyes. I am empty without you.
That was enough for Tegan. Please go away, she said firmly.
And scene. That was bottom of page 93, top of page 94. So you think Barbara Clegg is really getting into Tegan's head here?
Yeah, and there's parts where instead of Tegan just saying, like, no, I don't need your help to Mariner, it sort of says, she does it, like, she says it disgusted. Sort of, there's a lot more dialogue on how she feels when she's talking to Mariner.
Also, because this story was heavily script edited and because Eric Sayward had to rewrite the last 10 minutes because it had to fit into this trilogy, Mariner sort of disappears a little bit before the climax. But I think the way that she writes Mariner's departure is a little better here than on television.
Yeah?
Mariner looked at Tegan with pleading in his eyes. Help me, he begged, page 123. Tegan was confused and terrified. She still did not quite understand what was happening.
I can't, she answered, but Mariner did not give up easily.
I need you, he called, stretching out his arms to her. I need you. The calls slowly died away into echoes as he and his captain faded from view.
The last glimmer of them was of Mariner's hand, stretched out towards her, which I feel actually almost pays homage to the episode where the first thing we see of Mariner are his hands.
Oh, you're right. I never thought of that. Fist bump. Good job.
So, yeah, I think that was written off well, but I think my favorite part of this is that Tegan's reaction is just never written. So, it leaves it up to the reader to figure out that just Tegan didn't care. Tegan never cared.
She forgot about him the second he disappeared.
Yep.
Now, the character of Mariner never comes back. Tegan is around for parts of 2 more seasons after this. She was back in 2022. In 2022, they mention her Auntie Vanessa, who was briefly pictured in Enlightenment, but they never mention Mariner at all.
Her favorite aunt, Vanessa.
Her favorite Aunt Vanessa.
I mean, I would say in the book compared to the episode, the scene where Tegan is like changing into this outfit for the party, I think the Doctor is a bit nicer about it in the show, because in the book it says the Doctor was impatient, like knocking on the door like five times impatiently. Are you ready yet?
And when Tegan comes out with her hair all done up and she's wearing that glamorous dress, what's the Doctor's reaction on TV?
In TV, he says nothing. He kind of just scoffs. But in the book, at least, he says, like, you look good. So at least there's that.
Yes.
So there's at least that.
But Peter Davison, I guess, was looking for the humorous part, and it's funnier to have him completely ignore her than it is for him to say, oh, you look pretty.
I would agree with that.
So what did you think of the book overall? What do you think of Barbara Clegg's prose style? Do you think it was better than TV, about the same as TV?
I feel like there were parts of it that were better than TV and then parts that were worse, because there are some things where that you just need that visual element to help figure out what's going on and figure out the clues. Because, like, in the book, especially with the villain, they're almost spoon feeding it to you, like that Rack is the bad guy, or the bad girl, I should say. So I think it's more fun in the episode to try and decipher what's going on, and since I saw it first, I think seeing the episode before reading the book was also helpful, because I sort of had more of this picture painted in my mind, and there were some things that made more sense to me, and certain things.
So what is your favorite sci-fi TV series? And you've watched a bunch lately on Netflix. Well, there's the show that takes place in Indiana that you might enjoy a little bit.
Oh yeah, Stranger Things.
And then there's the show that takes place at the boarding school with the goth lead actress, who's named after a day of the week.
Oh yes, Wednesday. I like Stranger Things better, though.
What do you like about Stranger Things?
I like Stranger Things because, like, there's a lot of characters in the storyline. I like how it's sort of almost not connected. Like, there is, like, it's helpful to know, especially for, like, the climax of season 3. But you don't need to watch season 1 to know the events of season 2. You don't need to watch you should watch season 2 if you want to watch season 3, but you don't need to watch any of those seasons for season 4, because the characters already get their own introductions, because, you know, there's a time jump, so everyone already knows. So we already know, so we get a new introduction because we don't know what's been going on in the past year.
Are female characters on TV better and stronger now in the 2020s than they were in the 1980s when I was your age?
Oh, absolutely.
So, which actress do you think would do a very good young Tegan? Millie Bobby Brown?
Natalia Dyer.
Who is Natalia Dyer?
She plays Nancy.
On which show?
Stranger Things.
Okay.
I think she would play the best Tegan because her character in Stranger Things already acts that way, because she's kind of in a love triangle. So she sort of has to play things off, and there are a lot of guys that fall for her anyways. So I think it's different in Maya Hawke's perspective because of the character she plays. I don't think it would translate very well, but Natalia Dyer's character is quite similar to Tegan's, especially in that episode.
Based on Enlightenment, would you want to watch more original classic series Doctor Who?
I think it depends on the plot and who wrote it. Because obviously it's mostly men. But, like, how misogynistic was the guy that wrote the episode?
There's an episode that I could show you called For to Doomsday, which was written by an old white guy in his early 60s.
Oh, fun.
And his way of writing Tegan is not quite as sympathetic as the way she is portrayed in Enlightenment.
Oh, fun. Sounds so fun.
And there was also a boy companion on the TARDIS at that point, and he and Tegan get into many arguments.
Okay, well, over what?
Everything.
Are they petty?
Well, I'll have to show you the episode and we'll find out.
Oh, okay.
No, but that, of course, is not one of Doctor Who's finest hours. Enlightenment is one of my favorite stories of all time.
I think it's my favorite of the ones I've seen.
All right, Callie, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully we'll have you on again before the series runs its course. There's another book coming up several months from now where Tegan is written terribly. Maybe I'll have you read that book and weigh in with your report card.
I would love to do that.
All right, have a great night, and I'll see you around the house.
Bye.
Doctor Who, Enlightenment by Barbara Clegg, televised as Enlightenment, teleplay by Barbara Clegg, televised in March 1983, paperback release date May 24th, 1984, target book number 85, cover artist Andrew Skilleter. In response to a warning of great danger given by the White Guardian, the Doctor sets new coordinates and the TARDIS materializes on the heaving deck of an Edwardian racing yacht. But the Doctor soon discovers that this is no ordinary yacht, and no ordinary race. Captain Stryker is competing for an unusual prize, Enlightenment. The crew will be lucky to reach port safely. But with such a prize, would they be lucky to win? Barbara Clegg, the first woman to write a Target Doctor Who novelization, and there would only be 3 more before the original line concluded, 2 of whom were only credited as co-authors, doesn't waste much time establishing herself as a legitimate talent. She hits the ground running in Enlightenment, her first, and as it turns out only, novelization. Her very first paragraph neatly prefigures and summarizes the entire plot of the book to come. Check. There was satisfaction in Turlough's voice as he moved his queen into position. He had his opponent on the run now, and very soon the White King would be cornered and completely surrounded. Clegg is also good at showing how the Doctor is still unaware of Turlough's treachery. Even at the end of the Black Guardian trilogy, events, quote, seemed to intrigue more than alarm him. And for a first-time Target writer, she certainly understands how the Doctor works, using language similar to Terrance Dicks's beloved asides about how things quickly go south whenever the Doctor gets involved. Quote, Turlough put out a restraining hand. The last thing he wanted was for the Doctor to start throwing his weight about. It could only lead to trouble. End quote. And it would. After this strong start, I had high hopes for the rest of the book. Mrs. Clegg writing without all the padding or other silliness imposed on her scripts by Eric Sayward. The Guardians wear headdresses on their heads here, not birds. None of the Black Guardian trilogy novelizations ever mention the birds, come to think of it. And Captain Rack's Part 3 direct-to-camera cliffhanger rant is not here, but I'm going to play that audio from the TV because Linda Barron nails it.
Oh, Doctor, you're such a fool. Did you really think your ephemeral mind could defeat me? Lost. All that awaits is your ultimate destruction.
And yes, by the way, the stories are all true. Page 92 of my copy of the novelization, the 1984 second printing. After I realized that the novelization did not have Linda Barron's direct-to-camera rant, which I loved when I was 11 years old as much as I love today, I decided to write the rant myself on page 92 in pencil, or as much of the rant as I could remember. Quote, "You fool, Doctor! It will only result in your death!" Exclamation point. Part 4. And that's at the bottom of the page, and then I drew an arrow up to the second to last paragraph where the cliffhanger would belong, in mid-paragraph, by the way. And yes, when Callie got to that part of the book, when she read it, she really, really laughed when she saw what I had done and said that I was adorable. Jackson, one of Captain Stryker's crewmen, is less featured in the book since, as it turns out, Some of his TV scenes were Sayward added padding not original to Clegg's story. The Part 2 cliffhanger, end of Chapter 6, is also missing Mark Strickson's cliffhanger acting and shouted dialogue, which I miss, actually, and Callie really enjoyed that scene, too.
You are doomed, boy. You are doomed, boy. You are doomed. You have failed me. You will now see my wrath. Now see my wrath. You will live aboard this ship in perpetual torment.
No! I will never serve you again!
But while she removes the actor's moments from those two cliffhangers, Clegg does add the sort of creepiness to the Eternals that wasn't possible in studio in 1982. Tegan's cat and mouse game during her first meeting with Mariner, below decks, is properly unsettling, with Mariner appearing unexpectedly, and having eyes that were like space, quote, limitless and empty. The book just feels truncated, though. Apart from the missing acting at the cliffhangers, like I said, a lot of dialogue exchanges are condensed into simple prose, notably the Doctor and Turlough's introduction to Stryker's crew. The character of Turlough benefits from Clegg. In this, the final story of his introductory trilogy to be novelized, Clegg tells several scenes from his sinister point of view. Turlough laments that his personality brings out the bully in others, and his newfound faith in the Doctor upends his personal philosophy to, quote, look after himself first and not fall too much into the trap of caring too much about anybody else. Even in a non-adversarial moment, he, quote, could not resist a momentary smile of pleasure at the Doctor's discomfiture. He reflects that he, quote, was not quite the coward that he always claimed to be, and Clegg clearly pinpoints the moment where Turlough stops asking the Black Guardian for help and calls for the Doctor instead. So, even though 3 different authors adapted Turlough's first 3 TV serials, and they looked at him through 3 different lenses, his on-screen story arc is preserved pretty well across the books. In lines that did not make it to TV, presumably scripted by Clegg and then cut in rehearsal or post-production, Clegg milks ambiguity out of Turlough's final act of heroism. Although I wasn't sure for a minute which of us you were going to push, the Doctor said softly to the boy. Neither was I, was the enigmatic reply. But, as I mentioned at length earlier, because, face it, dear listeners, I always mention everything at length, Enlightenment as a TV script benefits from being the first Doctor Who serial, penned by a woman, offering us new perspectives the show did not give us before. I was hoping to see even more of that perspective in the book, but there are no sequences set from Captain Rack's POV, which feels like an opportunity wasted. We do read Tegan's suspicions at Mariner offering her a drink while he's sitting over her in bed, but that was on TV as well, and there's just not much extra insight on what it's like for these female characters to live in Eric Sayward's fundamentally misogynist world. Quote, as his eyes came to the face, Turlough got the surprise of his life. Captain Rack was a woman. She was also beautiful, with white skin, and auburn curls, and a smile. A moment on TV that I loved, Tegan modeling her ball gown for the Doctor, who merely harumphs in impatience like an oblivious man, is not in the book, and that turns out to have been a Peter Davison ad-lib rather than the author's own observational humor brought to the page. Now, Clegg's treatment of Mansell, the one speaking black character in the book, is pretty patronizing and reads fairly uncomfortably 40 years on. I have debated whether or not to read the paragraph, but I am going to read it, and you can judge for yourself. Page 69. He was obviously an officer of some sort. His brocaded coat flashed with gold thread, but it appeared to have belonged once to someone else, for it fitted him poorly. His broad shoulders were nearly bursting at the seams. He walked with the lithe power of a black athlete, and even as Turlough noticed the burnished ebony skin and the panther-like tread, the man flung open a door ahead of them. That reads as if Clegg is trying to be complimentary and flattering, but reading it 40 years after the fact and knowing now what not everybody was aware of then, it's just kind of insulting, trading on a sense of alienness and athletic stereotypes which, considering that the character is an eternal and is merely cosplaying in the role, would not actually belong to the character in universe. The moment in the book where I felt that Clegg was really speaking from her heart and not merely copying out her rehearsal scripts into the word processor is when she writes from what I assume had to have been her own direct personal experience. Quote, "For the first time, Tegan felt that she could cope. There had been other young men boringly concerned about her in the past. She was on home ground. Thank you. You needn't have been," she said dismissively. The squelch did not work on Mariner. He ignored it, and simply continued to state his own feelings, which appeared to be quite impassioned. "I missed you," he said hotly. I was concerned. He looked into her eyes. "I am empty without you." That was enough for Tegan. "Please go away," she said firmly. But none of her usual ploys seemed to work. Mariner still went on. She did hate emotional scenes, particularly when she could not return the emotion. The prose, in most of the book, is elegant. Venus is said to have sulfuric clouds and radiates the shimmering heat of hell itself, both scientifically accurate and poetic. After a long look at the galaxy from the deck of Stryker's ship, Tegan marvels that they were, quote, floating on a sea of stars. At other times, Clegg propels the narrative forward with short, urgent sentences and no wasted words, in the best Terence fashion. She also drops in some continuity references to earlier stories like Castrovalva and Black Orchid, a reward for the long-time reader. Clegg doesn't do much to improve on the TV visuals, not that the TV episodes need improving, but I really enjoy her narration of the Part 1 cliffhanger reveal, which so affected me on television. "Look," he said urgently. It was not sea which surrounded them. There were no waves, no long swell, no distant horizon. There was nothing but a vast blackness, spangled with faraway stars. "We're in space," the doctor said. Into view glided a square, rigged 18th century frigate, so close they felt they could almost have touched her. Beyond her were the tall lines of a clipper, beyond her a galleon, beyond a shape that was older still, with a hint of the Phoenician in her prow, another and another, floating in the dark as far as the eye could see. "What are they?" Tegan whispered. "Spaceships," answered the doctor. Page 38. When Rack removes Turlough's chains, Clegg writes, quote, "glimmering to nothing," under her hand. She also seems to mock the Eric Sayward penned ending with the Guardians. Quote, "This whole thing has become more like a boardroom meeting than ever," Tegan thought hysterically, which again is a description taken out of the Terence Dix playbook, always a good playbook to write from. While we get zero extra insight into the character, Rack is still pretty awesome in print, befitting Linda Barron's superlative TV performance. Rack gets additional dialogue in the book. We learn the ghoulish secret of how she discovered wine from the mind of an Earth Buccaneer captain. And there's a fun moment where, quote, "rage restored the doctor more than any amount of resting would have done." And a last note. All the teeth gnashing over Lee John's performance as Mansell, he's just as deliciously over the top in print as on TV. And that's necessary because he has to play up to Linda Barron's energy. If the book is based on Clegg's scripts, the rehearsal scripts, you'd have to say that Lee John was playing the part exactly as scripted. Exactly as scripted. Page 92. His expression seemed to indicate that he personally would positively enjoy the bloodshed to follow. And here's what it sounds like on the TV.
Resist any further, Doctor, and you will regret it.
Next time on Doctor Who Literature. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. We're at the end of our 10 straight Peter Davison novelizations, and we are going back to the beginning. Well, not the very beginning. That would be the novelization of An Unearthly Child, episode 65 of this podcast. But now, in 1984, the Target books are going to start filling in the gaps from all the 1960s William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton serials that had not yet been novelized. And remember, we've only had a small handful of those so far. The first story in this new era of Targets, which is going to last pretty much to the very end of the original Target run, book 156, over 70 books from now, is a season 6 Patrick Troughton story, which eagle-eared listeners of this podcast might gather is not perhaps my favorite story of all time. Joining me next week to go point for point, toe to toe, counter for counter, bob to weave, jab for jab, hook to cross. Well, you get the picture. Mr. Fraser Gregory is coming back on Doctor Who Literature to discuss what he thinks is one of the greatest television moments of all time in what is now the 60th anniversary year of Doctor Who, but a story that I think perhaps is not quite Doctor Who's greatest moment. Far, far, far from it. Next week, join Fraser and me as we debate Doctor Who, The Dominators. You have been warned. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. This podcast is produced by David Barsky, Jim Sangster, and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo and the opening sea shanty was designed by Jim Sangster. A YouTube link to a video for that sea shanty will be posted in the show notes. Special thanks to my special guest, my daughter Callie. Love you, kiddo. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, on Mastodon at Dr. Who Novels at mastodon.social, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.